We need to use methods that are perhaps unconventional, non-standard methods, a kind of, I would say, ambush. Hi, welcome. Well, of course, it's hard to leave this topic, which is why this series continues. Well, as we can see during the day, unfortunately, there hasn't been any breakthrough, and we all hope that it would somehow be resolved. It seems that people are getting impatient. People would like something to finally happen, and of course, for the police to finally catch Duda. And the police are also getting a lot of criticism here, a lot of practical things. You could practically say that a wave of hate has already poured out in various words, some of them quite crude. Yeah, all day I saw and observed how the police were getting it. As you know, our channel is all about trying to keep a certain calm in all of this, to stay reasonable. So what if we just look for criticism in everything? What's important is to somehow handle this situation, which is difficult, not just for the residents, but also for the police. I think that in some way what's happening right now, this whole operation, is something unprecedented on a Polish scale, which even the military joined, providing a military drone that's used during wartime for the operation. Well, yes, there hasn't been a similar operation like this before, so I think it will be a kind of symbol. Either the police will succeed and catch the drone, or something will happen and the situation will be resolved or not. And unfortunately, that will be a failure. And I think that today both the police and all of us are aware of this, without adding to all of it also to the impatience. And I don't like everything either. Well, for example, when he approached the house, that's how everything looked at 10 o'clock post-meridium. Well, I think that if we're dealing with a cunning poacher, with a person of this type, and the police officers know very well that those routine actions like get down, lie on the ground, well, those are good, but in a completely different situation. Well, you have to use methods that are perhaps unconventional, non-standard methods. Well, the kind of, I would say, ambush, also the equipment of the officers, whether they had night vision, what it looked like, what the surroundings were like. Well, I'm saying this is something you definitely have to ask questions about, and you have to think about it, because maybe it was the only and unique moment or opportunity to just catch him so that this case would finally be over. But here it turned out otherwise. Now everyone, or a lot of people, are mocking the fact that he just shot at the police officers. And then he disappeared somewhere in the forest or in some buildings, and no one knows where he is. Well, logically, he didn't run far away. It looks like he's somewhere nearby and lying low. Well, there's no other possibility. Unless it's some kind of, I would say, bluff, like it wasn't really him. That's also possible. You can't rule out that he sent one of his friends and told him, "Go, check if the police are near my house." And that person came and made a loud noise, maybe a shot, whether it was a shot or not. And he just runs away, so it wasn't him, and that's why the police don't know where he ran off to. We can assume, we can speculate, we can make guesses, but I think we have to rely primarily on the facts here. And now we know why Duda went so crazy, why he lost his mind. And that's also something that I think is a kind of relic of the past. It's about getting acquainted with the case files for those who don't know the subject or aren't involved. Well, it's like this. When the investigation conducted by the police or the prosecutor's office ends, the suspect has the right to simply take those files and read them page by page. He obviously knows very well who said what, and in cases like this, where emotions are involved, because it's the closest people who are testifying, well, there are emotions. But he found out what his daughter says about him, what his son-in-law says, what his mother-in-law says. Well, yes, the suspect, the suspect, when it's handled by MA, ends up taking those files and reading them. It's like he finishes with a rifle and starts shooting. It seems to be such an impulse, a relic of the past, because after all, the most important thing is what the witness says in court. That's where the judge evaluates everything. And now it turns out, because many times it happened that the suspect would sit down with such files, read them, knew what was in them, and then would reach out to the witness. The witness in court ended up saying something totally different. I'm abstracting here, but this is also something from this story, something that needs to be changed. It's like this, well, Starawish today is, I would say, a besieged fortress. There's a police headquarters in the school. The officers come there. The commanders discuss everything. All the most important police officers in the country are there with the chief commander, the provincial commander, and they make decisions. It's definitely not all, I would say, as simple as it seems. Well, yes, from what people say, you just have to find him, you have to look for him. I'm not going to say here that this is a difficult area to search, about 200 hectares. We can assume that we've already talked about this. Duda knows, he knows this area, it's not out of the question. Because I hear things like, when he went to the forest, he would go even for several days. So I would assume that he has some kind of hideout somewhere. There's also talk that there aren't really any shelters from World War II there, but there are various so-called partisan cellars or niches, pits, where partisans used to store weapons or hide them from the Germans. You can easily hide there. Also, if he went into the forest for a few days, he had a hiding place like that. It's possible that he simply has food supplies there, maybe some regular canned goods, water, clothing, and that's why he's just staying there and not coming out. Well, I also think that the weapon he has is homemade. Poachers usually, since this kind of weapon is unreliable, have several pieces of this type of weapon. So I wouldn't rule out that somewhere in his sort of warehouse, his stash, maybe even from the partisans, he keeps all of it there. And also, when he brought game from the forest, that game was already dressed, as they say. So usually you have to hang the game somewhere and then you can simply, as hunters say, dress it. So there has to be some kind of room, so the conclusion is that Duda could have just hidden there and is sitting there. You also can't rule out that it's something more complicated, for example, like you enter through some room or building, and only then is his hideout. Well, going back to that topic, it also seems that everything was well thought out. He held the biggest grudge against one of his daughters, the one he shot, maybe because she really supported her mother. Well, the abuse had been going on for many years, and she kind of took matters into her own hands too. She encouraged her mom to file reports about the abuse against her. There's also a divorce in the background, and Duda is someone who thinks everyone belongs to him, who wants to control everything. He just couldn't stand the thought that his wife would leave him. According to him, he would be the laughingstock of the whole village if his wife decided to leave. So, well, he was the angriest at that daughter. But also in all of this, we can see now, thanks to new information, that it was all somehow planned. Because when he went to his mother-in-law's, he was supposed to run into his father-in-law, but he didn't shoot at his father-in-law. They exchanged some words there, maybe even harsh ones. But he didn't shoot at his father-in-law, he only went to his mother-in-law's house and shot her there, and then he shot his daughter and son-in-law. So you can see from this that his actions were cold and calculated. It wasn't like he went into a frenzy and shot at anyone who happened to cross the barrel of his rifle. So, well, if that's the case, then we can assume that he has some awareness of all this or of the consequences that will come to him. And it's not out of the question. I would even assume that maybe the fact that he's there is a bit of a product of our imagination, all of us. Well, we all hope that he's out there somewhere, that he's hiding, that he'll come out. Theoretically, there should be some kind of breakthrough. Well, it's getting cold. The evenings will be cold. He's frustrated, after all. It's already the fourth day, and he's constantly under stress, a bit like an animal that's being hunted. Alert, well, maybe he'll want to make some breakthrough himself to get out. Well, we assume that if he doesn't have any food prepared, then he'll want to at least get some food. But also, well, you can't rule out that in all of this, he might somehow, and this is very dangerous, try to carry out the plan he had. Well, unfortunately, I would say that in all of this, after all, not with everyone. According to him, of course, he hasn't settled the score with everyone yet. The fact that he approached the house where his wife is doesn't mean that he came for food or ammunition, as it seemed, but he could have simply finished settling the score. That's what he still had left to do, and maybe that was his plan. Naturally, more legends are emerging elsewhere, and we don't discuss everything. There's talk about a list he made. There are 10 names on that list, and he crossed out 3 so far. Well, but I think those are just rumors, and nothing like that is actually happening. It's hard to imagine that he would have made such a list beforehand, because why would he? And that such a list even existed somewhere. Well, those are more like fairy tales, but such stories do go around among people. But as for the idea that he thinks like, okay, my life is over, but I have to settle things, I have to balance the accounts, and only then will he somehow resolve it. Either he'll just end it himself, or he'll get into some kind of shootout. With the police, anything is possible. Maybe he'll want to fight his way through. I'm saying, considering this version as the most optimistic for all of us, that he's just there. But we can't rule out that he crossed the border, that he's somewhere in Slovakia, maybe even farther, that someone took him from there, gave him a ride, that he's in a completely different place and everyone is looking for a needle in a haystack. Why do I say this? Well, I'm also a bit concerned that the police only set up a special hotline for this case today. If they're launching a hotline after so many days, it means they need information. That would mean, well, that there aren't any concrete leads and all possibilities are still on the table. So it also means that he simply might not be there. Well, exactly. There are all sorts of reports coming in that he was seen. At the airport, he was seen in Krakow. I told you myself that 2 people called me about it. Well, that also needs to be taken with a grain of salt. The police certainly get thousands of such reports, so, well, it's difficult to verify them, but there's no other way. Everything has to be checked because maybe, well, there is a grain of truth in all of this somewhere, but it's a problem. Because from a technical point of view, if there are thousands of these reports, it's obvious that you simply can't check them all. Well, I would also say that unfortunately those typical Polish situations appear too in those towns where everyone knows each other. At first we all thought, or it was said, that he was a hunter. Apparently you could buy game meat from him, and some people even thought he was a hunter who hunted legally and sold game meat. Yeah, people were buying, he was poaching. It looks like he was basically poaching almost legally and nothing could be done about it. Well, a lot of people must have known about all of this. Also, on a daily basis, let's say, he functioned in such a way that many people saw him as a generally nice and helpful person. And only today did they find out that all these years he was a beast at home, that he abused everyone. And this must have been going on for a while because the first case was in 2022 and the second case is recent this year, the one that has just been concluded. So roughly speaking, it must have been going on for about 10 years. So for 10 years, he systematically abused his family. That includes the children, who were still small back then, and are adults today. They are aware of what they went through, and it's hard to blame the daughter or the wife for deciding to take this step. But everyone, I think, had to know, or at least suspect something. I mean, where would a man get wild game in his house from? No one pays attention to that, no one talks about it. Also, the fact that he had a weapon. The whole village, or at least most of it, must have known about it. Or at least see that he simply walks around with that weapon, because how could you possibly hide that kind of hunting rifle? Of course, well, there's still no strength. I know people are impatient, that people have had enough. They probably wish the solution was already here, but there's no other way. You just have to wait for some solution and take care of your own safety in the meantime. The holidays have started, people are going to work, they have their normal duties. I suppose that for them life goes on as usual, but in the back of your mind you have to remember that anything can happen because after all people are unpredictable. He won't get a higher punishment than the one that's waiting for him, so he has nothing to lose. What's on his mind, what kind of plan he has, it's hard to predict, but he's definitely dangerous if he runs out of food or water. Then he might want to break into a house, try to get it. He might blackmail, involve his family, force his family members or friends to help him somehow. Well, of course, anything can happen, so the alert is still in effect, even though it's an extremely difficult situation. However, I can't imagine a situation where he just disappears somewhere where the police can't find him, whether dead or alive. No one knows what happened. These people will spend years constantly suspecting that he might come back, that he might repeat what he did. So I can't imagine any kind of normal life in the village. And that's something we have to remember. So it's better now to just wait, be patient somehow, and protect ourselves. There, the police are asking, among other things, not to come because there are people who come out of curiosity, they get in the way, they go into the forest, so they're also asking not to go into the forest. The voivode has issued a ban on the use of pyrotechnics because that really can happen. There was a rather surprising situation there. The next day it turned out that someone was throwing firecrackers, supposedly to scare away wild animals. Well, that's obviously possible too, so all of this is a nuisance. I think we still have to rely on ourselves. You know, I look at certain things with some distance, like trusting what the police officers are doing. Time, if it doesn't help, because if this situation is resolved soon, then of course, great, everyone will calm down. However, if he disappears, the situation won't be resolved. Well, then, of course, there will be a time to hold the police accountable. That's inevitable, and it will definitely be tough. But let's give the police a chance. Let them work calmly, because if not the police, if not their officers who launched the drones, then simply nothing would be left. I also don't want to make excuses in any way because sometimes I get criticized for explaining, for speaking, and so on. But common sense says that, of course, there are a lot of police there, about 600 officers, there are border guards, and there are other people who are helping. There is equipment, and some say it's modern equipment, but this modern equipment in these kinds of conditions, well, I would say it's not exactly something that will show us everything. Like global positioning system where Duda is, because in some way everything has its limitations, and thermal imaging and the thermal camera and those drones that were used, those flying eyes. Well, if someone is sitting a few meters underground, maybe a police dog could detect them, but it has to come to that place, pick up the scent, and then there's a chance. However, I said this is a tough opponent and nobody would really want to have such an opponent because a man who has always known these forests, after all, he was born in the neighboring village in Staravish, has lived here for decades, knows the forests and goes poaching there. He also knows how to make various kinds of traps which can be dangerous, and he knows how to use tricks, including ones like that. Because when you go hunting for wild animals, you have to cover up the human scent and put another scent on it, otherwise the animal won't go into the snare. Well, he knows how to do all that, so you have to remember that he's really a tough opponent, not like today. I heard he's a 57-year-old old man that the system can't handle. Well, that's not entirely true, so I think we shouldn't make fun of him, but rather keep a level head. Well, of course, there's no way out, so in a way we're obligated to keep meeting until this matter is resolved. We want to share information that is factual in some way, not to stir up emotions or moods, because that simply won't help. Of course, leave your comments. As you can see, many people are simply knowledgeable about this. They would have done it differently, they would have shot, chased, but we also know that it looks a bit different when you're sitting at home and a bit different when you actually go into the forest where this kind of guy is. Those are two different things, but we'll keep watching and we'll talk about it. Well, that's probably it for today. We'll see what the night and tomorrow bring. I hope that it will end positively, somehow positively. So either Duda will just give up somewhere in that forest and maybe end his life, or he'll get into a shootout with a police officer. But I assume that he will fight until the end, that he won't give up. But I think that will be a good solution for us. That's all for now. And take care, of course.